if you had to choose your own ending, where do you think the nuclear apocalypse would start? I mean, there's the obvious choice of Ukraine, where a rapidly escalating war is being fought. There's the Balkans powder keg, which already started the first world war ever in human history. There's Israel, the Koreas, or even Taiwan. Man, what a world we live in. I present to you a less obvious setting for Fallout 5, a tense region that you maybe don't know too much about. The border between India and Pakistan. Both India and Pakistan have nukes and absolutely fucking hate each other. They share the same history and language, yet still can't stand each other. How did this even happen? Let's find out. Let's take a look at the geography first. The heart of Indian history was always here in the north. I mean, you can't possibly hope for a better location to start your civilization, with an abundant supply of fresh water from the Himalayas, a warm climate, fertile land, the Indus River in the west, and the Ganges River in the east. This is why this paradise spawn location was always under attack from jealous invaders, who usually came from the northwest Punjab region. It's not like they had much choice. The Himalayas were to the north, and there were oceans on each side. Indian history, in a nutshell, can be summarized like this. Hostile forces invade the natives through the northwest. The natives flee south. Another enemy invades through the northwest. The previous invaders flee south, and the cycle continues for eternity. There were the Aryans, the direct ancestors of Indians today, as well as everybody from the Persians to the Central Asian nomads to even the Greeks under Alexander the Great. Point is, all this killing and migration brought about a lot of forced cultural mixing or even exports of Indian culture. Hell, Buddhism was able to spread all across Central Asia and China because the nomadic Greater Yuezhi thought, hey, I actually like this Buddhism business, as they were slaughtering the Indian Buddhists, adopted it and spread it across the world as they rampaged along. Well, in the 8th century AD, there was this one anomaly that was just straight up impossible to mingle religions with. You could probably guess which one it was. Islam. The Turkish nomads came from Afghanistan and started spawning no bullshit Islamic kingdoms all across northern India. Back when Islam started its invasion, the Indian subcontinent was dominated by Hinduism, which was able to kinda steal the teachings of different religions around it and claim potato potato. Sure, that may have worked with religions of a similar vein like Buddhism, but Islam was a whole different beast altogether. As far as Islam was concerned, there was one God, not 1,000 or whatever. No karma, no reincarnation. The only thing that awaits you after death is Allah's holy final judgment. Everybody's equally pathetic in the eyes of Allah, so none of that caste system nonsense. You could probably see why compromise was so difficult. Islam came with a fundamentally incompatible OS, and too bad they had all the power as well. Therefore, the social structure for most of northern India was made up of a minority Islam people ruling over the majority Hindu people. There was basically no common ground whatsoever to bond over. The Islam rulers were completely disgusted by these infidels believing in all these different unholy gods. The Hindus didn't particularly appreciate being constantly reminded how shit they were either, and most of the natives, except for the untouchables at the very bottom of the caste system, chose to stay Hindu in contempt. To be fair, an impressive amount of culture and language got mixed together through osmosis during some uncomfortable hundreds of years. However, neither side was willing to compromise any part of their drastically different religions at all. Jumping all the way from the 8th century to the 16th century, the final dynasty of India, the Mughal dynasty, makes its grand entrance. As you could probably tell from the name, the Mughal dynasty was made up of Turkish nomads from Mongolia. They too were Islamic invaders, but they were much stronger than the ones before them. Instead of being satisfied with conquering the fertile north, the Mughal dynasty pushed south with breakneck ferocity, almost unifying the entirety of India. Of course, they oppressed the shit out of the natives and their stupid infidel religions along the way, sparking countless anti-Islam rebellions from the Hindus and Sikhs across India. India was a complete clusterfuck of a war zone, and that's what Britain inherited when it finally came to India to claim its most lucrative, jewel-in-the-crown colony. Before we get any deeper, let's back up a bit and define India. India is an unbelievably large region that's bigger than Russia less Europe, spanning all the way from Afghanistan to Southeast Asia. The entirety of India was almost never completely unified, and all sorts of emirates ruled over their own rural territories. Even during the height of the mighty Mughal dynasty, the emirates were pretty much left alone as sovereign states within the empire because directly micromanaging everyone in India would be too much of a headache. As the Mughal dynasty started to crumble, these rural states became feral and ran amok like chickens without the oppression of their overlords. From the British point of view, this was very bad news because you can't extract resources from a colony if they're too busy killing off each other. In other words, it was simply bad for business. So, the logical step would be for Britain to just unify the whole damn thing through the East India Trading Company, toppling one emirate and city-state after another. 100 years later, India was fully in the hands of the British. The Mughal dynasty was all but dead, and there's no one left to stand up to the crown. Congratulations! The East India Trading Company inherited this dysfunctional, war-torn, disastrous headache called India. Now what? Every region has its own culture, language, religion, and laws, so good luck trying to establish common standards that everyone would agree with. To make matters worse, the East India Trading Company was a company, which meant that they needed to extract the most profits with the least cost. So they just carelessly slapped a band-aid over this rapturing crevice and did what the Mughal dynasty did. Leave the emirates to rule themselves as long as they paid taxes on time. Remember, everybody hated each other in India, so this wasn't very sustainable. In 1857, a massive rebellion called the Sepoy Mutiny inevitably erupted and killed 6,000 British and 800,000 Indians. This too was bad for business. The East India Trading Company was dissolved, the Mughal dynasty was taken off life support, and the British Empire itself had to directly get involved to straighten this shit out. Ooh, scary, but the problem of how do you unify a country that doesn't want to be unified still wasn't fixed. The full might of the British Empire quickly realized this problem and followed the footsteps of its predecessors. Leave them the hell alone. Each region's problems and religions were kicked under the rug, hoping that they'd sort it out by themselves without being too much of a nuisance. It doesn't sound very sustainable either, right? Yes, but it worked better than ever before because Britain was a third party. Everybody can have a common son of a bitch enemy to complain about and bond over. In the 1900s, when India's independence movement got started, the dreadful elephant in the room loomed over everyone. Who should take control? What even is the country called India? A country, as we modern people understand it, is a collection of people sharing the same language and culture, and if we've made one thing clear in this video, it's that India is everything but that. The Emirates were still cheerfully running amok doing their own thing with such drastically different languages and cultures that they should literally be considered different countries. That's not even the biggest problem. What about the religious conflicts raging on in India like wildfire? The British Raj had a terrible demographic of 70% Hindu as a dominant religion and 20% Islam as the biggest minority religion, and they still refused to mix and absolutely fucking hated each other because of that festering feud of hundreds of years. The established social hierarchy of Hindus and Muslims was completely upended under British rule. It makes sense if you think about it. The ruling minority Muslims, understandably, hated how the British were taking away their power and were non-cooperative. The majority Hindus, understandably, hated how the Muslims were ruling over them in the first place and happily swapped one shitty overlord for another. The Hindus learned English, got government jobs, and started all sorts of businesses. Naturally, the wealthier and better educated Hindus started to get more powerful. The Hindus decided that they had enough of the British horror and spearheaded India's independence movement with the Indian National Congress. This is when famous folks like Gandhi and Nehru made their name in history and stood up against their British parasites. Yeah, that's good and all for the Hindus, but what about the Muslims? The Hindus outnumber them, have grown way too powerful, and there's hundreds of years of bad blood. The Muslims can safely assume that the Hindus will gleefully oppress the shit out of them for no other reason than spite once Indian independence is finalized. A lot of desperate attempts for reconciliation were made by the All India Muslim League before it was too late, but it was too little, too late. Even the Muslim revolutionaries had to admit that there was no way they could possibly be on any level of understanding with those Hindu people except for violence, and uttered the ultimate S word: secession from Hindu India. It became impossible to quell the flames of Indian sovereignty and independence after World War I. After all, this treatment as inferior slaves was no longer acceptable after 1.5 million Indian soldiers fought and bled for your bloody crown in the Middle East. Gandhi's non-violent protests drew headlines from all over the world, and Britain could no longer pretend like everything was fine. Yeah, eternally grateful, whatever. But India was Britain's most profitable colony, and Britain really didn't want to lose it altogether. In 1935, the Government of India Act was passed and granted sovereignty to the Indian colonies' numerous states. Sounds good, right? Both the Hindus and Muslims absolutely hated this. The Hindu Indian National Congress disliked how the states were divided up by religion, which would only amplify hatred and lead to further division. The All India Muslim League disliked how this gerrymandering got the Hindus dominating most of the states, which could only lead to oppression of Islam. The bloody shrieks of discontent pierced through India until World War II, and Britain really could not care any less about the stupid domestic politics of some faraway colony, while the Nazis were literally taking over Europe. World War II bankrupted Britain, and it was barely able to stay afloat, let alone continue hemorrhaging money to oppress millions of people on the other side of the world for no immediate benefit. In 1946, Britain forms the Constituent Assembly of India so that it could transfer power, make India someone else's problem, and get the hell out. Unfortunately, the hostilities among the Hindus and Muslims were way past the point of no return. Mobs from both sides massacred each other in Bengal, killing an estimated 4,000 people and definitely not helping the situation. Remember, Britain really wants to get the hell out and lick its World War II wounds in peace, but just leaving India right now would surely lead to a scorched earth civil war. In 1947, Britain decides to just follow the All India Muslim League's suggestion and divide India into Islam people and Hindu people so they'd bloody stop fighting each other. This is how Pakistan and India came to be their own independent states. The Muslim-majority Indus River region and East Bengal was now Pakistan, and everything else was India. Please tell me you're cool now, please tell me you're cool now. Okay, it seemed like everybody got what they wanted, right? Why the hell are India and Pakistan threatening to nuke each other now in 2023? It's because Britain did a shitty job dividing the two countries. If you look at the map, the middle parts here are just flat plains, yeah? The aforementioned Emirates have pretty much always been living here, and from their point of view, Britain just randomly dropped in and said, "You got 1 year, move to either India or Pakistan, or just declare independence. I really don't care, please let me go home." While a lot of Emirates chose to be either India or Pakistan, some decided to choose the other option and actually declare independence or just ignore this order altogether. These special states are the simmering embers that would eventually rage into the terrifying inferno of a full-out war. The biggest troublemaker of them all was this emirate called Kashmir. With a minority Hindu ruling over a majority Islam population, both India and Pakistan could reasonably claim this territory and not be totally ridiculous. During this tense standoff, India sent in its military to forcibly annex the independent states, and the very real possibility that Kashmir could be next to fall under the guns of the Hindus was very, very concerning to Pakistan. Pakistan thinks, India can't conquer Kashmir if I conquer it first, and straight up invades Kashmir. The king of Kashmir obviously does not like this, and panic calls India for help. India gladly sends its army to fight off the Pakistani invaders, and that's how the First Indo-Pakistani War started, a terrible conflict that killed 6,000 Indians and 20,000 Pakistanis. Mind you, this all happened less than a year after independence from Britain, and 2 years of pointless slaughter later, Britain got dragged back in from across the world, kicking and screaming, to broker a ceasefire. The Kashmir region was divided into Pakistan-occupied Azad Kashmir and India-occupied Jammu Kashmir. Whatever goodwill remained between Pakistan and India got blown to smithereens along with all the soldiers sacrificed during the war. Less than 20 years later in 1965, another conflict happened in, you guessed it, Kashmir again, and ignited the Second Indo-Pakistani War. Another 10,000 or so casualties occurred, with a lot more on the way if America and the Soviet Union didn't hold them back. You probably got bad vibes just looking at this map of Pakistan. These two parts of Pakistan had nothing in common besides Islam, and East Pakistan had enough of the West Pakistan bullshit. East Pakistan rose up and demanded independence from West Pakistan, a move that India absolutely loved and supported with everything it could. How do you think West Pakistan reacted? You guessed it, the Third Indo-Pakistan War. This was an uphill battle. I mean, just look at the map. They were too far apart for West Pakistan to possibly do anything, and East Pakistan liberated itself to become the Bangladesh we know today. India and Pakistan are now fully aware of how dangerous the other one is and chooses the logical move, an arms race. But hey, Pakistan is nowhere near the weight class of India. The only way it could possibly compete is, obviously, with the blessing of Allah. Specifically, Pakistan went full radical fundamentalist Islam and created a military state. India isn't any better. Radical Hinduism spread like wildfire, and populist Islamic hate policies became the norm among politicians. To make matters an order of magnitude worse, India started developing nuclear weapons in 1970, a move that Pakistan hastily copied before it got nuked first. You might be thinking, this seems like a bad idea. Why didn't anybody try to stop this? From a geographical and strategic perspective, pissing off India too much means losing out on the entirety of the Indian Ocean. Naturally, America and the nuclear establishment couldn't go too hard with sanctions on India and had no choice but to watch as India joined their ranks as a nuclear power. Pakistan, on the other hand, literally perceived this as an existential threat and grimly weathered whatever sanctions necessary to become a nuclear power itself. Believe it or not, the Kashmir problem is still not resolved now in 2023, and tensions are rising along the temporary borders between India and Pakistan. In 1998, just after both countries unlocked nuclear weapons, they had another war and completely spooked the entire world. The resentment of 600 years compounded and grew exponentially with each generation, reaching heights that now threaten the entirety of human existence. You're probably wondering, alright David, who's to blame here? Is it the British? Is it the Mughal dynasty? Is it India or Pakistan's fault? It's really a complicated issue, and I personally have no fucking clue. What do you think? Whose fault is it? Go argue with each other in the comments down below. This has been David Bradford from Knowledge Raiders, and try not to get nuked out there.